There is a grace in the air on this day in this central part of Ireland, for it is the feast of our patron, St Finnian. His life is not without interest for scholars of the Celtic period. The 10th century life stresses his Leinster birth and education, probably actually further south than here, in County Carlow. Near his place of birth and education, Idrone, he made his first 3 foundations, after which he went to Wales and studied the traditional monasticism of St David, St Cadach and St Gildas. A close friend of mine who was also a Welsh-speaking Baptist from our area, has entered the Pre-Most Detention and taken the name of Gildas. St Cadach, that was the church, the name of the church that we had for the Welsh Moths for years. Our chaplain became our bishop. And actually the church of St Cadach, near where I lived in early life, was the church where I was struck by grace when still an evangelical Baptist, wandering in there slyly and also going even to High Mass. And I still think of the grace that passed on that occasion. I sensed something. When he returned to Ireland, he made foundations in County Wicklow, it's way down, and at Munya Sulcan. He visited Kildare, and he moved on again to the most important achievement of his life, the foundation of the great Trod monastery. That's not too far from where the bishop is. He gathered numerous disciples, 3,000 are claimed for his whole period there. His special characteristic in this foundation was to unite study, especially of Holy Scripture, with the Welsh and ultimately Eastern form of monastic life. Now we know that there is a link between Celtic monastic life and the ancient monastic East. We see certain characteristics coming through. Great austerity and penance, many, many psalms, silence, and also this element of simple wooden cells built rather like a lavra, a laura, around a more solidly built church. It was pure. It looked back to the ancient East. And I remember that it was in the Carthusian customs, an ancient passage was there, still maintained, that our fathers followed an oriental light. Finnian personally had the reputation of master or teacher of the saints of Ireland. Trod had a huge radiation. People would gravitate there. When the monks eventually left Clonard after his death. They took with them a gospel book, a crozier, and a reliquary, around which they later built their churches and monasteries. The evangelization of these Celtic countries radiated from a centre of prayer. Nearly every village in Wales starts with the name Llan, means the enclosure, and then comes to mean eventually the church of, and then a name is added, an ancient Celtic name. A monk who would set up a place of prayer, a person who would build a church, would popularly be acclaimed saint. But we see that it started from prayer. The monastery, which grew by the influence of divine grace, had a radiation. It convected heat and warmth. It was light in a dark world, a place of culture, knowledge, education, healing of the soul, and even perhaps even healing of the body, because that's where knowledge was stored in society. By the way, when Henry VIII in England dissolved the monasteries, it was very difficult for societies to survive, because what had been taken for granted had to be taken on by the state, and it wasn't quite the same. Eventually, there was this terrible plague, and on this day, the 12th of December, Finnian died of it. As Paul died in Rome, for the sake of the Christian people, lest they should all perish in hell, so Finnian died at Clonard, for the sake of the people of the Gael, that they might not all perish of the yellow pest, said the writer of the Irish Life. As it happens, when we're burying the father of our local parish priest here, who was a good man, it was at Clonard that it was happening, for he is from there, a farm in the area, and one felt the link with the early centuries, as one does actually here, because this settlement began in 450 AD, and St Keenan, who made the foundation here, was a disciple of St Patrick himself. Now, there are certain things coming through in the life of St Finnian. The penitential of Finnian is probably his. It is based on Welsh and Irish sources, and on St Jerome and St John Cassian. Now, these are interesting because Jerome was resourced in the Holy Land, great scripture scholar, and actually someone very much aware of the importance of solitude and the monastic life. St John Cassian spent a while, as well as in Egypt and the Holy Land where he started, in the south of Gaul, on the island of St Honoratus. Reims, the Abbey of Reims, is still there to this day. And so did actually St Patrick. He spent a while there, and therefore there's a cross-section, a cross-fertilization going on, and a link with the East. John Cassian took notes with his friends St Germanus, and he was able to transmit the best of the spirituality of the East. And St Benedict harnessed it, because he obliged the monks in his room to have his conferences read as the last act of the day before Compline. And I remember at La Trappe there was one of the cloisters that was in the same direction as the nave of the church, just outside the church, and it was full of altars as well on the other side, but there were stools there, and that's where the readings would happen before Compline. But the fact that St Benedict wanted St Cassian read meant that also he was plugging in to the purest source, the East. It was coming through the West, through him. But even though it's using these, it is in large part original and influenced also that of St Columbanus. Now, St Columbanus, of course, came back to Europe from the Celtic West in the Dark Ages and brought this spirituality and this severity. And the figure of the abbot was so central in the Celtic monastic life that it caused tension with the bishops there in Gaul. He kept moving and moving, eventually went as far as Italy and died in Bobbio. It is the oldest surviving example of its kind and spread the influence of Clonard in penitential discipline and also scripture studies. There was a period in which this important abbey shared an abbot with Kildare or with Clonmacnoise. Later still, it was refounded as a house of Austin canons, which is exactly what happened here at Duleek and also in places like Penmon, Llanddwyn, Beddgelert, and so on in Wales. They embraced the roots of St Augustine. It was open and they were ready for any good work. It was the flexibility of the early monks, and we need that too, ready for any good work. O Master, who has trod before this ancient pathway trod of yore, the silent feet of many more, thou still dost guide us, thou still dost guide us. And when the tears of many years, the secrets kept from mortal ears, are known again where thy word steers, thou still not listening, thou still not listening. For thou dost know the solitude that held the unknown beatitude, beheld and held in quietude, and still dost ponder, and still dost ponder. For thou didst call and calling heard the distant echo of this word, call on and call till nothing stirred, in dying wonder, in dying wonder. Yet would at times as something move, where now thou art, where ancient love burn still and whisper from above, faint not we conquer, faint not we conquer.